everyone, welcome back to Shred Guitar in the 80s. Today I thought it would be a lot of fun to look back on 5 players from the shred era that I think are really underrated. Guys that really never won the top of the list of the guitar polls in the magazines or anything like that. But I think were every bit as good as all the really famous, well-known guys playing in big bands at the time. These are 5 players that all had a big impact on me and had a major influence on my playing, and I consider them to be some of the best players from that era. And their playing even holds up today. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about each player and pick out an album that I really like from them. And maybe if you haven't heard it, you can check it out, or if you haven't heard it in a long time, you can check it out. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to come on and do this. I'm going to cover a lot more obscure players in the future, because I think there's some amazing players out there that if I can do just a small part in getting someone to listen to, I think that would be awesome. So let's get started. So the first guy I'd like to talk about released one of my favorite albums of the entire era, and it's quite possibly in my top 5 favorite instrumental albums of all time, kind of neoclassical heavy rock instrumental albums, and that would be Joey Tafolla. And Joey's just an amazing player. This album he put out called Out of the Sun, like I said, it's one of my favorite albums from the era. I just love it. It has Tony McAlpine playing keyboards. Paul Gilbert guests on like 3 songs and does some solos. I think he's on 0 Hour, Stalingrad, and Truce with Kings, if I'm not mistaken. Just amazing playing from everyone. The rhythm section's great on this album. You have Butch Reynolds Carlson on drums and the amazing Wally Boss on bass. And Wally Boss, rest in peace, he passed away I think in the early 90s. Actually was Yngwie's bass player in the Trilogy tour. So if you look at some of the old bootlegs on YouTube from the Trilogy era, you can see Wally playing, I believe. There's also some really cool footage of Wally playing down in Florida. I think he was down from the Florida area. But he's just an amazing bass player. And the combination of all these players and Joey's writing and playing really produced a really magical album. I love this album, Out of the Sun. Eternity's End is just a killer intro song, lead-off track. You got Out of the Sun with a beautiful melody. 0 Hour, that killer Paul Gilbert intro. He said he used a lot of cool melodic minor stuff on there. The Summon's kind of a dirgy song, really cool. And Stalingrad's just an up-tempo kind of jam with killer guitar playing from Gilbert and Tafolla. And Joey's playing is so elastic and fluid on this. You can hear the Paul Gilbert and Tony McAlpine influence. I believe he actually took lessons from both of those guys before he made this album. And I heard in an interview where Joey said he actually used Tony McAlpine's guitars. I can hear Tony's influence on this album too, from his amazing keyboard work, and I think Tony might have produced this album. Anyway, this came out in 1987. It's just a gem of an album. It's a neoclassical masterpiece from the era. I put it right there with David T Chastain's Instrumental Variations, the first Rising Force album, Vinnie Moore's Mind's Eye, and Tony McAlpine's Edge of Insanity. Those are my top instrumental rock guitar albums from that era, and I put it right there. So if you haven't heard Joey's playing, I would definitely check it out. He's got a cool legato style, does some really cool stuff with the bar, great picking chops, really cool arpeggios. I actually really prefer the arpeggios that the guys played in this era than nowadays. They're just all over, but back then they do, the arpeggios really tastefully, and they're part of the melody, and in the context of the songs, I think they work awesome. So if you get a chance, check it out. Joey Tafolla, Out of the Sun. The next part I'd like to talk about is Chris Impellitteri. And Chris is just an amazing player. Just his attack, he's got killer influences, just great songwriting and tone. Chris is amazing. And I remember getting the EP, it was advertised in Guitar World magazine, just called Impellitteri, the black cover I have somewhere around here. And I just thought it was amazing. I could hear that rainbow influence and Yngwie and Alcatraz and all this. I think he actually auditioned for Alcatraz. He was up for that gig, but Yngwie got it, if I'm not mistaken. But Impellitteri is just great. And in this era, in the 80s, in the shred era, Impellitteri was definitely neoclassical. And this album, Stand in Line, had the amazing Graham Bonnet on it. And this album is just one of my favorites. This is the cassette I actually had back in the day. I love the songs on here. Just the songwriting, Chris has always been an amazing songwriter. He's got great melodies and chops, and his riffs are killer. You have Stand in Line, which is a great opening track, a title track. Graham Bonnet's vocals are great, the melody, the riffs, just I love the songs in this album. And his solos are just crazy back then. He would do these really cool ascending lines just straight up the neck. You could hear that influenced players like Joe Stump. You know, I think Chris might have alternate picked that stuff, where Joe kind of used more economy picking nowadays. But you know, and his playing back then was different. In that he was trying to play as fast as he could. I don't know if his accuracy was 100%, but it was just amazing. I remember he released a video, an instructional video, that I used to watch over and over and just like, what is that? It was just like crazy sounding, so fast and amazing. And his chord progressions are just brilliant too. Like I said, they cover Since You've Been Gone, a really cool Rainbow cover with Graham singing. Some of the songs on her, Secret Lover. They do a really cool version of Over the Rainbow. Tonight I Fly, I love that's a great track. Leviathan's a really heavy track. Good Night and Goodbye, Playing with Fire, another killer guitar, just amazing. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to the early Impellitteri, or even the later, I definitely recommend checking this out. Stand in Line by Chris Impellitteri, it's just an amazing album. And his stuff nowadays is still brilliant. You can hear more of a Priest Van Halen influence, and his guitar solo is actually cleaned up a lot. And he's a very precise player now. Not that he wasn't back then, but he's just going for it, you know. And his playing's changed, and I really enjoy his current stuff too. There's a magic to this album that just stands the test of time for me, and I really love it. So if you get a chance, check out Chris Impellitteri. This next player is kind of an interesting story. This album came out around the same time as Out of the Sun by Joey Tafolla, and it's Tony Friedinelli, I think is how you say his name, Friedinelli. And he actually went on to play with Third Eye Blind, believe it or not. I don't know if he's doing anything remotely like he did on this album. I think the band is called Apocrypha, and they actually put out 3 albums, but the first one's by far the best. The second one was really good, but it was very cacophony influenced. I think Marty Friedman produced that one. The third one was a lot different than the first 2. But this one's my favorite, The Forgotten Scroll. I picked this up on CD and I just love this album. The playing's great. You have, the singer's really good on this. The bass player and drummer's just amazing. I don't have my glasses, I don't know their name offhand. Mike Poe on drums and Al Rumley on bass. Just really great songwriting, very progressive neoclassical metal of the era. The opening track, Penance Keep the Faith, is just killer. Last Children of Hope is another great song. Holy Wars, killer track. Writing in the Night, I just love all the songs in here. And Tony's playing is really, it's a combination of really finesse, but you can hear he's a young player and he's just going for it. So it's very aggressive at the same time. A lot of cool sweeps, like I was talking about those arpeggios from the era, with some cool alternate pick lines. Some exotic scales and timing and phrasing on this. For a young player, I don't know how old he was at the time, but he was barely, I don't even know if he was 20. He might have been a teenager when he recorded this. But just amazing playing. I mean, he probably was only playing a few years and just doing amazing stuff. The songwriting is just really aggressive. This is a really fun album. If you haven't heard it and you're a fan of the bands from that era, I definitely would check it out. Apocrypha, The Forgotten Scroll. It's one not to be forgotten. So definitely check it out if you can. This next guy, some people would say maybe he's not underrated, but I kind of think he is. He didn't win any guitar polls from that era that I can recall or anything like that. He did get some press, but to me, his songwriting was probably as good as any, if not better than all the other players from that era. And his playing was extraordinary. Great picking chops, legato. I love the tone on this album that I'm going to show you. And that's Tony McAlpine, the album's Edge of Insanity. And I'm actually going to do an episode on this upcoming where I talk about this album more in depth and break down, you know, some of the licks maybe, or just play some of the licks or talk about it. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do with it yet. But I love it. And I used to stare at the album cover because I was a Kramer guy, and Tony was playing this really cool pacer. And at the time, I talked about in a couple episodes ago that I had a PV Renown amp, and he had a PV Classic amp. And I thought, well, it's close enough, you know. And he ran an MXR Distortion Plus, like Randy Rhoads, so guess what I went out and bought? I talked about last episode, the MXR Distortion Plus. But I really love the tone on this album, and Billy Sheehan on bass and Steve Smith on drums is just extraordinary. I actually listened to it the other night, just kind of laying in bed in the dark there, and I put it on, and I listened to the whole album, and I was listening to the rhythm section the whole time because it's so amazing. I mean, Steve Smith, wow, and Billy Sheehan were just knocked it out of the park on this album. And I love the fact it's kind of live sounding like a trio. You know, they're just going for it. And Tony's solos, every solo is perfect on this album. So memorable. The tone, I love the tone. You know, some people give the 80s tones a bad rap, but I kind of prefer the 80s tones. Maybe I'm just an old man, but I like that tone, you know, I like that. And in a way, that solid state tone, a lot of the guys use more solid state stuff with Shrapnel Records, you know, or distortion boxes or whatever to get more of their distortion. It kind of lends itself to picking and articulation. You can hear that chirp of the pick, which I really like. And it's kind of, I don't know, it just worked for the songs really well. Every song on here is great. Wheel of Fortune, The Stranger, the supposedly live guitar solo chord at midnight, but I mentioned this before, it kind of sounded like they piped in some crowd noise over a studio solo. Could be wrong, but I think that's what they probably did. Empire in the Sky, The Witch and the Priest, The Taker, it does a really cool Chopin prelude on here. Just amazing stuff. Tony McAlpine, Edge of Insanity, and look for my episode on this album coming up. But he definitely flew under the radar. I think he should have been Best New Talent. You know, I think Vinnie won it in 87, so hey, I don't know who won it in 86, probably Steve Vai maybe, but I would have given it to Tony McAlpine over Steve, I think, so. I'm sorry all you Steve Vai fans, but Tony's a very special player. And the songwriting was just brilliant on this, so if you get a chance, check it out, and look for the episode where I cover it more, and that's Tony McAlpine, Edge of Insanity. And the next guy I'd like to talk about is David T Chastain. And if you watch my channel here at all, you know that I'm a big Chastain fan. He's definitely one of my favorite guitar players and influences of all time. I have everything by David. And these two, I picked two albums because to me they're kind of companion pieces. You kind of need both. And that's Instrumental Variations, the amazing, immortal Instrumental Variations, and Within the Heat, his follow-up instrumental album to that. His work with Chastain's amazing. CJSS, I love all the CJSS stuff. But these two albums are very special for guitar players. And the thing that was really cool about David's style, he played like no one else. He had this cool thing where he kind of double pick, combined with like hammer and pull-offs and sliding around the neck, that I don't know if anyone could duplicate it like David. But it was methodical, it was thought out. It was in a way that was so musical and so fluid that it just, you never knew where it was going, his style. I mean, his melodies are just amazing. He's so melodic. He comes up with killer riffs. His songwriting's just excellent. I mean, those songs hold up just as well today as they did back then. I love this tone from the old lab amps, and he used a Kramer Pacer Special with one pickup. And I used to stare at the album covers, just wish I could have that guitar because I was a big Kramer fan at the time and still am. I've got my Beretta from '86 here. But David's just an extraordinary player, and he covers so many different styles. Just on one album alone, he covers a bunch of styles. The first one's very neoclassical. The song Horizon has a little bit of a fusion feel to it. And then Project 107, Code 3X was kind of more of a real heavy track with a little fusion element to it. But Now or Never is definitely a neoclassical influence. The Oracle Within's neoclassical influence. This album, I remember getting it in '87 and just listening to it over and over and over. I love the tones. I love the, like, spontaneous combustion in the middle. He does this really cool bluesy phrasing with kind of an echo, kind of reverb, and I just thought it was really moving to me. And David's phrasing is very elastic. and very, like I said, unpredictable. He moves up and down the neck and does like those glissandos and cool arpeggios. Not really sweet. He doesn't sweep a lot of arpeggios, but he does these like 2-string, really cool walk up and down the neck kind of arpeggios. It just, I love, and his, like I said, his melodies are amazing. I think David, one thing I love about David's playing, and you can tell where his picking technique's very worked out, is that his chirp, the chirp of his pick, especially on these albums, to me, is the best chirp of, you know, of anyone I've heard. I love it. It's kind of high, kind of has a high end sound to it, but in a warm way. Yeah, I just love it. I just love his playing. It was amazing live. Within the Heat, I talked about in an episode where I covered the intro to Excursions into Reality. So if you get a chance, check that out. Try to play that solo if you can. That intro is just amazing. But Dave is definitely one of my favorite players of all time. He's a really nice guy. I've corresponded with him online a lot, and it's been really special for me to get to know him online a little bit. And, you know, go out and get all of his stuff. He just released 2 Oddball compilations, David T Chastain Oddball 1 and 2. The first one's kind of the best of his studio tracks. The second one's more rare and live stuff. And if you really want to check David out and see the breadth of his playing, I would definitely check out the Oddball stuff. Really just get any of his stuff and download it. Don't just stream it, download it. Let's help, you know, all these albums, let's help these guys out, you know. Let's keep them going. So if you get a chance, check it out. David T Chastain. So there's 5 players from that era that had a big impact on me that I love, that I thought I would just talk about today. And maybe I'll go into depth, break down some of their licks or whatever in the future, and I'll cover some more players. But anyway, I thought it'd be great to kind of keep the shred guitar in the 80s going, kind of like the second season, I guess. I took a year off or something, but getting back into some of the players from that era. And I'm also going to be covering other stuff on my channel beyond just shred guitar in the 80s or shred stuff, just playing in general, and you know, how I learned to play and that kind of thing, and maybe share some of the stuff that I learned along the way with y'all. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. It's been fun, you know, talking about these players, and to me they're still relevant as ever. When I put it on, I'm just instantly transported back to that era and inspired. So when I pick up my guitar, just can't help but shred. So until next time, have fun picking.